Welcome to the Daily Dev Talk with me, Adrian Nantchev, where we explore and share experiences, stories and lessons 7 days a week from across the games industry, helping you make the best game you can. Stay tuned for today's episode. Good morning, Overload Nation. Welcome to another episode of the Daily Dev Talk, talking to game developers from across the world to bring you experiences, stories and lessons 7 days a week. Today, I'm joined with Alasdair Beckett-King to talk about his latest game, Nelly Cootalot, the Fowl Fleet. But first, Alasdair, tell us about yourself first, please, and how you got into the games industry.
Hello, Adrian. My name's Alasdair, as you said a second ago, so it was completely unnecessary for me to repeat. I am, by training, a filmmaker and animator. During the day at the moment, I am developing the video game you just mentioned, Nelly Cootalot, the Fowl Fleet, and in the evenings I perform stand-up comedy for little to some money. Well, zero to some money, if I'm honest. So that's what I'm doing now. How I got into the games industry is it sort of begs the question: am I in the games industry as an indie developer making a game? Well, this would be the first game that I've made that I would release commercially. So only when it's finished would I say that I have got into the games industry, and even then, only possibly.
That's cool. So a comedian game developer.
Yes. Does that sound? If that sounds a little pessimistic, then I apologise, and will definitely be more upbeat and enthusiastic on the future questions.
Well, no, it's all right. It's you. It's your opinion, your thoughts. That's what you're here for. So, so tell me then about your team, or sole trader, or the company.
Well, the team's quite interesting. When I started making this game as a Kickstarter, it was just me and someone who was going to do the press and someone who was going to do the music. And as a consequence of the Kickstarter, which we'll probably talk about more later, I teamed up with Application Systems Heidelberg to co-develop and publish the game. So on my end, I have me and a few other sole traders, a few other individuals doing things like casting the voice recording sessions, producing music, doing sound recording, those sorts of things. While at that end, they've got a reasonable small team of about 8 to 10 people. We have in there, that's their publishing and development base, but it's a very small team. It's essentially me and a programmer working on the game, but at their end they also have translators translating it into French, German, Spanish, and another language that I'm not going to say in case I've forgotten which one it is, because I don't speak any of those languages. I think it's Italian, but if it's not, then I apologise to Italy and to all Italian people for not translating my game into their language. Yes. So what we are is a single individual collaborating with a small production company.
Cool. That's a little different. Sole trader, a single individual with a company. It's different. So tell me about your game and what you wanted the player to experience.
Well, my game is a classic point-and-click adventure. Is the way we sold it initially, and so when I started out, I was trying to recreate the sort of the magic and sense of fun and wonder that I had playing old adventure games in the 90s, like Monkey Island, and of course later games like Curse of Monkey Island and Grim Fandango, and those sorts of adventure games by people like Ron Gilbert and Tim Schafer. And as development's gone on, I've become slightly more ambitious in the goal, because rather than simply recreating the feel of a game from my childhood, what I've been trying to do is learn a little bit from how adventure games and video games have developed since then, to try to overcome some of the really irritating qualities that classic adventure games used to have. Some of the more user-unfriendly Walking Dead puzzles, completely illogical chains of events, which I think even the best adventure games in the 90s were guilty of. So I've been trying to come up with a type of gameplay which is hopefully a bit intuitive and a bit more user friendly. So the puzzles will be perhaps slightly easier, or if not easier, fairer and more reasonable, while hopefully providing a good level of challenge. So it's that my focus at the moment is on that, trying to maintain a balance between challenging puzzles and puzzles which can actually be solved without having to resort to a walkthrough.
Okay, so you're really trying to get something different and unique and more up to date.
Well, I do think that the thing that dates those games most is their approach to the player, and their approach to the player is one of particularly with certain games is quite a belligerent and sort of arms folded. Well, I bet you're not going to solve this approach. And I do think that, for instance, the Telltale adventure games at the moment, which are often criticised by fans of classic adventures for being too easy, are not actually too easy most of the time. They're just much fairer and much more reasonable in the challenges that they present the player with. Of course, my game is still strongly in the vein of the classic adventures. You know, it's a cartoon adventure game. It's got the main character is a pirate. You point and you click with a mouse, or you point with your finger and you tap on a tablet. And yeah, so it certainly is in that vein. But what I'm trying to do is take the best things I remember about playing those games and leave behind the things that used to annoy me. Or rather, leave behind the things that annoy me more and more and more now that I have less and less time to play video games and get more and more irritated by impossible puzzles.
Well, that's great to hear. That's great to hear. So, I'm curious, how is it you went about getting press attention for magazines and such to write about you? Was there anything special you did?
Well, the game I'm making now was a Kickstarter based on a freeware game that I made back in 2007, which is a shameful number of years ago. So I made a freeware game called Nelly Cootalot Spoonbeaks Ahoy, and that was in the context of freeware adventure games, which I know is quite a small world. That was quite successful, quite popular. It got lots and lots of downloads, and it got a bit of coverage in a couple of magazines. You know, the kind of magazines that get used in those days used to have a CD on the front, giving away free games. You know, in the olden days of 2007, when that used to happen. And it appeared on a few blogs, and we got reviews on websites like Kotaku and Rock Paper Shotgun and things like that. And so when it came to trying to get press attention for the Kickstarter, so that's rather than getting press attention for the launch of the game, because we haven't got that far yet. What I did was I looked at everybody who had ever mentioned the freeware game, and I emailed them saying, "Hello, do you remember so many years ago when you reviewed this game, or you commented on this game? Well, look, I'm now doing a Kickstarter for something that's going to be bigger and better and all the rest of it. Thanks so much for what you said before. Do you think your readers would be interested?" And that was very helpful. So having already, it's not like I had a big track record as a games developer or anything like that, but having made people slightly aware of me, so at least they could go, "Oh yeah, I remember that. That was a nice little game." Gave me not exactly a foot in the door, but a toe in the door, shall we say?
Cool. So
I don't know why I'm at the door in bare feet there. I'm wearing sandals, probably in that visual analogy.
Well, as long as you're not wearing socks with the sandals, I'm sure it's fine.
No, certainly not.
So I'm curious then, how is it you went about funding the game? What methods worked and what didn't work so well?
Well, to begin with, Kickstarter was the main way I funded the game. I ran a Kickstarter campaign which aiming to raise £15,000. In the end, we raised £20,000, which was really nice. And that was when the aim of the game was to produce a small, pretty low-res adventure game. And I was planning to spend that money on almost everything involved in the production of the game, but mainly to allow me to record voice actors for it. Since then, I've teamed up with Application Systems, and they've brought on their programmer and the translators I mentioned. And so now what I would say is that the production value of the game is between €250,000 and €300,000. And that is including the time I spent working on the game before the Kickstarter, which was innumerable hours creating the artwork and the assets that were already created by the time we began the Kickstarter. So what happened when I teamed up with them was that little pot that after Kickstarter fees, £18,500 became my budget for animating and recording the English soundtrack and the music, while the German soundtrack and the programming moved over to application systems, and they've handled the costs of that.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's been part funded by them and part funded by the original Kickstarter.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. And a successful Kickstarter campaign is an awesome achievement.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
It's hugely rewarding process, Kickstarter, particularly because the support and feedback of the people on Kickstarter has been invaluable when it comes to sort of testing out ideas. Not quite getting to the point of beta testing yet, but testing out ideas, testing out what font do you prefer, what's more readable, those sorts of things. It's been great.
mm-hmm. And speaking of feedback, is that the main way with the Kickstarter fan base that you got feedback and QA for the game?
Well, I hope increasingly I'll be getting more and more robust feedback from the Kickstarter backers. But what we have is a small team of testers over in Heidelberg with application systems, and they've been doing sort of a first pass of testing, making sure that everything fits together, making sure that the puzzles are solvable, trying to spot any bugs and sort of show-stopping errors. And we've caught some nasty ones recently, so I'm very glad that they're doing that job. But actually, one of our big focuses on testing has been translation, because, as I say, the game is being translated into a number of languages. And while sort of bad translation in video games is almost traditional, and there's lots of hilarious examples of poor translation in classic games, when it comes to an adventure game, it's absolutely essential that the translators have contextual information, because if you don't understand the text in an adventure game, most of the time you don't understand the game, and you can't solve the puzzles, because it is about the story. It's about what the characters say. It's about who's trying to achieve what, and how you can find your way through the plot. And so you've really got to understand what's being said. And so it's absolutely crucial that first of all we're making sure that the hints are not being lost in translation, but also that we're not accidentally creating red herrings that send the player off in completely the wrong direction. And moreover, because the game is I was about to say it's quite funny. The game is hopefully quite funny. Of course, that's for other people to decide. I think it's quite funny. But of course, that means it's full of cultural references, which would make sense to an English-speaking audience, but which might not work in other languages. So we've got to find a way of not necessarily translating jokes literally, but finding a finding a reference that would work for German culture, finding a similar reference that would work for French speakers, and so on. I'm always reminded of when it comes to the dangers of translation, the monkey wrench puzzle in Monkey Island, which if you're not an adventure gamer, you won't know, but if you are an adventure gamer, you will hate probably, in which you have to use a monkey to open a valve, as you would use a monkey wrench, which I guess works if you're an American. But if you're English, we don't call them monkey wrenches, we call them spanners. And if you're French or Italian or speak any other language, monkey wrench makes no sense whatsoever. So it's a completely unsolvable puzzle, which I can't imagine anybody solved outside of America before the advent of the internet. So it's to try and avoid those kind of pitfalls that we're asking people to play test the game as early as possible with sort of the first drafts of translations.
Yes, I can imagine all sorts of dilemmas and problems and confusions and complications would arise from a mistranslation, especially out of context. Who knows what kind of odd things could occur.
Absolutely.
So,
It's particularly tricky because English doesn't have gendered nouns, whereas the other languages do. And so I create all kinds of lines where I say, I'm going to pick this up, which is perfectly fine in English, but in the other languages they need to know what this is before they can use the word this, because it has to have gender attached to it. I think that's true. I don't understand the details, but the point is it makes translating very difficult because they need to know everything. They really need to know the context of each line. It's not just a matter of literal translation, or at least it isn't if you want it to make sense.
Aha, okay. So, then, what was the biggest thing that you learnt while working on the game?
The biggest thing I learned, I think, I would say it comes from the art side of it. I should have mentioned earlier that as well as I was originally programming the game, I'm not now, but I'm producing the animation and the artwork for the game. And when I started out, I had the idea that the game would have a sort of mixed media feel to it. I had in mind some of the sort of the background style of old Warner Brothers cartoons, like Roadrunner, or the Disney animation 101 Dalmatians, where the background art is very, very loose. It's got lovely inky lines, but the colours are often not quite inside the lines. So it's got a kind of energy and dynamism to it. And I thought I really like the mixed media, the way the character art is often in a slightly different style to the background art. And so I started out with 3D rendered characters, trying to make it almost look as if it was sort of plasticine characters in a 2D cardboard world. That was the image I had in my head to begin with. But it quickly became apparent that 3D rendered characters simply wouldn't sit in on a 2D background in a way that was convincing. And I really stuck with it for a while and tried a variety of different approaches, and eventually got to the point where I used a cell shaded approach. So the 3D characters are now rendered to look like 2D characters, and they fit in really nicely with the background. And I'm really pleased with the way it looks. But it's a very strange road to have gone on in order to get 2D backgrounds with 2D characters, to have gone to the lengths of 3D modeling and rigging characters in order to render them and make it look like I just drew them, which would have saved a lot of time. So it would be crazy now to go back and draw them all 2D again. So obviously I'm very happy with the way they are. But if I were trying to get to this point, I would never take the route that I had actually taken. So that's been very educational, yeah, it shows the importance of trying out a range of styles as early as possible, I think.
Yeah, 3D doesn't always work with 2D.
No, I do think that actually the opposite might have been more interesting, which would be 3D backgrounds with 2D characters interacting. I was thinking Hotel Dusk, I suppose, on the DS did that with the 2D. It's a very small screen, but I do think flat characters in 3D worlds, maybe that would work better than the other way around.
Yeah, I can see that working more.
But as I say, I really like the way it's all come together. It's just been really educational to think, that's how this is where I ended up, and what other routes I could have taken to get there that would have saved me time and effort. But of course, I could never have known that if I hadn't taken this road.
All right, yes, quite extensive. So I'm curious then, what was the best game dev purchase you made? Whether it was a software license, a top quality piece of hardware or equipment, or simply a comfortable chair, good desk, and a second monitor.
Well, a second monitor sounds like a great idea. I wish I had one. Rather boringly, I think the purchase which has given me most satisfaction, the purchase which has given me most satisfaction in overall would be a graphics tablet, a Wacom digital tablet. The one I have is very old now, but it's still fantastic. It's one of the things I'm most happy with buying. When I made the first Nelly Cootalot game, I drew all the backgrounds with a mouse because it was 2007, and that didn't seem like a ridiculous thing to do to me at the time. But it would be absolute madness to approach that now. So the Wacom has given me a great deal of satisfaction as an animator. But in recent years, my favourite purchase has been a little riser to lift my laptop up so that the screen is higher up, because I'm quite tall and I get a very sore back hunching over desks. And so the little riser bringing the laptop up to my eye line has really it's really transformed my life. My back feels an awful lot better, and I feel an awful lot happier about sitting down to do some work these days.
Well, that's a little unusual, but that's great.
Yeah, it's not a very exciting purchase, is it? I should say also, that we're also using Unity, so we would never have been able to produce the game in high definition without Unity. But it's got to be the laptop riser for me.
Oh, definitely. So, what game development related book, lecture, or learning resource can you recommend?
Well, mine is going to be quite specific. but I would recommend Adventure X, which is an expo or get-together of indie adventure game developers, which takes place annually in London. I think it's going to take place in Goldsmiths College this year. I think they've just secured the venue, usually in December. I don't think the dates have been fixed yet. And that it's not the biggest expo in the world, but if you're into adventure games, which I obviously am, it's a really fantastic opportunity to get together and talk with people about really interesting and innovative approaches to adventure games. Because we're in a strange situation, because adventure games have sort of lost their identity as mainstream games have adopted the best aspects of adventure games, non-linear quests, character and story-based gaming. All of those things are now quite mainstream, whereas they used to just belong to adventure games. And adventure game designers are finding really interesting ways of being creative and creating really interesting and original stuff in the adventure game world. And so it's been fantastic also to hear talks from people like Charles Cecil, who created the Broken Sword games, and Dave Gilbert of Wadget Eye Games, who makes the Blackwell series and published a great deal of fantastic low-res sci-fi adventure games. So it's just really wonderful to see the inner workings of those little projects, all made with small teams and not huge pots of cash, but people who are able to make a living out of creating adventure games.
All right, so Alasdair, what advice can you give to aspiring game developers, small indie studios, and people trying to get to where you are today?
The advice I would give to people trying to get to where I am today is think quite carefully about whether you want that, because I'm not sure. I'm in a position to say, if you want to be as successful as me, do A, B, and C. I'm at the moment, Nelly Cootalot will be the first commercial game I've released, so it's not very difficult at all to get to where I am. You need a good, decent degree of commitment and a successful Kickstarter. And a moderate degree of luck, and then you'll be there. But my advice, I think I can't think of any actually good advice. My advice would be don't listen to advice from people who haven't yet released their first game. I think.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That didn't sound optimistic enough, did it?
No, not always.
No, not always optimistic. No, my advice would be trust to your... No, I don't know. I haven't got any advice. Sorry.
It's all right. So what is next for you, and what's the best way to contact you?
Well, the next step for me is to focus on the promotional side of the release of the game. So, as I say, we're in the final stages of development, and I am writing up all of the texts that we're going to use for marketing the game on various online platforms and that sort of thing, and focusing on trying to get as much coverage as we can when the game is ready to release. So it would be really nice to be thinking about what the next project will be, but right now I'm not allowing myself to focus on that, because I have to keep focused on making this game as good as it possibly can be, really. And trying to get it out to as many people as possible. Mm-hmm.
Great. So what's the best way to contact you?
And the best way to contact me would be through my website. So you can email ali@nellykootalot.com. That's on the Nelly Cootalot website. Or on my website, abeckett-king.com, contact@abeckett-king.com. But an email is fine. And you can also follow Nelly Cootalot on Twitter, @ncootalot. And Nelly is usually pretty good at responding to people.
That's great to hear. So it appears, Alasdair, that we're out of time for this episode of the Daily Dev Talk. It was great talking to you and plenty to think about. So a comedian comedian/game developer, got a successful Kickstarter campaign, made a game back in 2007 using a mouse and without a graphics tablet. A nice little story, a nice little adventure.
Yeah, it's been a fascinating journey, if you'll excuse the cliche.
So I wish you well in future endeavours.
Thank you very much.
So stay tuned, more videos to come. Thanks for listening to today's episode of the Daily Dev Talk with me, Adrian Nantchev. If you are a game developer that wants to get your name and game out there, and to share your experiences and stories, or you have feedback or opinions of the show, then contact me at info@gameoverload.co.uk. That's info@gameoverload.co.uk. Stay tuned for tomorrow's episode, more to come.